Assalamualaikum everyone. Before we proceed with the event, I would request कि before we begin, please put your phones on silent. ठीक है? Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, sir. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum everyone, I am Juveria Atif and I welcome you all to the book launch ceremony. Before we proceed, I would request everyone to switch their phones on silent mode. We will first proceed with Tilawat.
الرحمن الرحيم والذين استجابوا لربهم وأقاموا الصلاة وأمرهم شورى بينهم ومما رزقناهم ينفقون صدق الله العظيم.
Jazakallah. With that, I would now like President IPRI, Ambassador Dr. Raza Muhammad, to give his welcome remarks.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. All praises to Allah, the Almighty, the most beneficent and merciful. Salam be upon Rasul Akram Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the humanity, all Pakistanis and all of you who sit here. It's a great honor, sir, to welcome you here. I don't know how to begin and how to end your introduction. Very frankly, ये तो ऐसे है जैसे वो कहते हैं ना सूरज को चिराग दिखाने के बराबर है मेरा बोलना जो होगा वो ऐसा ही होगा, but I will try to touch upon certain aspects of the great personality which we have sitting here, and I am very grateful to him that we are so honored. He was kind enough to choose our platform or be kind enough to say yes to our request to use this platform to introduce his book here in Islamabad. जहाँ तक जावेद जब्बार साहब का तहल्लुक है, मैं बड़ा सोचता रहा कि कैसे बात करूं. माशाल्लाह इतनी यूनिकनेस है, एक जगह पे इतना कुछ पैक्ड है कि उसको एक्सप्लेन करना बड़ा मुश्किल है. अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह, he is not from a political elite family, yet he has been federal minister thrice. तो पाकिस्तान में बड़ी अचीवमेंट है कि you don't belong to an elite family, you haven't inherited the politics, but still he was the federal minister. और federal minister भी किस किस करे, वो भी बड़े कमाल की बात है. मैंने लिखा था, मैं ज़रा देख लूँ कि ये फेडरल मिनिस्टर इंफॉर्मेशन के भी रहे, साइंस एंड टेक्नोलॉजी के रहे, और पेट्रोलियम एंड नेचुरल रिसोर्सेज. सो अ diversification in his job assignments also. When it comes to his oration, his speaking, his writing, his reading, his explanation, his skill to write so many good books, is amazing, mashallah, alhamdulillah. He has produced some of the best films Pakistan could. Ramchand, Pakistani, if I remember correctly. Beyond Mountains, और इसी तरह इनकी एक और डॉक्यूमेंट्री थी जिसका मैं नाम भूल रहा हूँ. आई विल हैव टू सी इट. पाकिस्तान, व्हाट इज पाकिस्तान, नहीं, अबाउट द ईस्ट पाकिस्तान. 110 मिनट्स डॉक्यूमेंट्री फिल्म जो ईस्ट पाकिस्तान पे बनी है, आई हैव सीन इट. इट इज़ अ यूनिक थिंग टू अगेन वॉच, एंड मोर देन 500,000 पीपल हैव सीन दैट मूवी. जो अभी तक उसके व्यूज़ हैं, maybe more than that, and it has been appreciated all over कि इतना अच्छा काम किया, इतनी well documented मूवी जो है बहुत कम पाई जाती है. एक और बहुत बड़ा कारनामा जो माशाल्लाह अल्लाह ने इनके हाथ से काम करवाया, it was the ordinance which he designed, introduced and get passed, after which the private channels were opened in Pakistan. Today we have, if I'm not wrong, 100 plus channels हैं जिनको लाइसेंस मिला हुआ है. ओपन कितने ये गौरी साहब से ही बता सकते हैं, बट आई थिंक 80 प्लस चैनल्स हैं जो हमारे काम कर रहे हैं, या ज़्यादा हैं सर, कितने? मतलब जो चल रहे हैं, चलिए ये के चल रहे. तो देयर सो मैनी, बट इट वाज फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम दैट इन अ कंट्री being ruled by a so-called dictator during martial law time, so to say, military rules time, he gets an ordinance passed जहाँ पे इजहार राय इतनी खुल जाती है कि सबसे ज़्यादा उस पर मट्टी पुलिस जो है मुशर्रफ साहब की होती थी. मुझे अभी भी याद है एक प्रोग्राम था हम सब उम्मीद से हैं, उनमें सबसे मोस्ट हिट चीज़ होती थी वो मुशर्रफ साहब की जो मिमिकिंग होती थी और उनकी, बट अल्लाह बख्शे उनको, वो भी बड़े दिल वाला आदमी था, उसने कभी उसको बंद करवाने की कोशिश नहीं की. बुक्स मेमोइर्स बेनज़ीर भुट्टो साहिबा पे लिखी, मेराज खालिद साहब पे लिखी, एंड मोस्ट इम्पॉर्टेंटली द वन विच वी आर गोइंग टू टॉक टुडे, लिसन टू हिम टॉक टुडे इज़ ऑन जल मुशर्रफ. इस बुक की जो यूनिकनेस है वो भी आई थिंक बड़ी इम्पॉर्टेंट है. मैं ज़्यादा नहीं बोलूँगा क्योंकि वो माशाअल्लाह ने सारा बताना है कि देयर आर सर्टेन थिंग्स विच हैव बीन डॉक्यूमेंटेड फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम इन दैट बुक. जो बिल क्लिंटन की और उनकी जो डिस्कशंस हुई, बिल क्लिंटन की जो डेब्यू इधर का विजिट था, एंड वाशिंगटन में जो बातें शातें होती थी, कारगिल वॉर के ऊपर इन्होंने लिखा हुआ है. मैंने किताब लकीली पढ़ी है सर, मैं लकीली पढ़ी है. हम अभी बात कर रहे थे, बहुत सारे लोग जो है ना किताबों पे रिव्यूज़ भी लिखते हैं, डिस्कशन भी करते हैं, और असल में उन्होंने किताब पढ़ी नहीं होती, पहले 2 सफ़े आखिरी 2 सफ़े पढ़े होते तो फिर खड़े होकर बोल देते. बट वी आर लकी टू हैव यू हियर. आई थिंक विद दिस स्मॉल इंट्रोडक्शन I will hand over the podium to him, notwithstanding the awards which he has won. इन्होंने फिल्म के भी अवार्ड्स जीते, इंटरनेशनल अवार्ड भी जीते, और बहुत सारी जगहों में ही वॉज द फर्स्ट पाकिस्तानी टू कॉल्ड अपॉन टू रिप्रेजेंट पाकिस्तान एंड गेट एन अवार्ड. सर वी आर प्राउड ऑफ यू एंड इट्स अ ग्रेट प्लेजर दैट यू आर हियर. प्लीज कम ओवर.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ambassador General Raza Saab, really it's very humbling to listen to you. You're very gracious, very generous introduction. And thank you for this honor of being here at IPRI and amongst such fine people, mashallah. My wife could not attend, the most important person, right? But she made sure her cousin is here to keep an eye on me. And I know she's recording it separately कि मैं क्या कहूँगा उनके बारे में. बिल्कुल उनके बगैर कैसे तारुफ पूरा हो सकता है. Man has to be known by the wife he is married to. Simple. And vice versa. A wife should be known by the husband she is married to. There should be gender equity, ना. ऐसे थोड़ी कि सिर्फ हम बेचारे हमेशा dependent on women. It's a mutual arrangement. It's a unique relationship. But thank you all. So many of you have left much better things to do with your respective boyfriends, girlfriends, whatever, and come here to IPRI, such a hospitable place to be back in, and under your leadership, mashallah. And I'd like to thank Ishtiyaq Mehkri Saab for coordinating all the logistics and setting this up. Thank you. So friends, the status of this book. Books in print and on paper, you know, एक generally assumption है कि people are no longer reading books in Pakistan. For a population of 240 million, yes, that's true. We should be reading far more. But the fact is that books are being published, they're being written, they're being published, and people are actually buying them. It's such a pleasure to visit, say, the Karachi airport bookshops and actually see this book on display. And when it was not on display, I said, बेचारे जनरल को भी आपने महरूम कर दिया. जनरल्स जिनका तो हक बनता है हर चीज में, उनकी मौजूदगी के बगैर तो काम ही नहीं हो सकता. तो इसे नहीं सर वो सोल्ड आउट है, अभी वो नई सप्लाई आने वाली है. हाय हाय हाय, ऑथर का दिल इतना भरा कि जनरल की किताबें भी खरीदी जा रही हैं, माशाल्लाह. और इससे भी ज्यादा बेहतर बात, हर 6 माह हमारे पब्लिशर पैरामाउंट रेगुलरली रॉयल्टी चेक भेजता है. क्या बात है, बड़े ईमानदार पब्लिशर हैं और बड़ी भारी रॉयल्टी मिलती है. जो आप खर्च करेंगे, अगर गलती करेंगे, बाहर वैसे बाय द वे किताबें रखी हैं, जनरल साहब आपने इजाज़त इनको कैसे दी अंदर आने की? सिर्फ 2 मासूमों ने किताब खरीदी है. They are all sitting here without a copy of the book. Yeah, it should be made compulsory. Do not enter, do not allow entry. But what royalty do I get? The author gets 15% as a special case. Normal authors get 10%. तो अगर आप 1,000 रुपये खर्च करेंगे तो बेचारे मुसन्निफ को 150 रुपये मिल जाएंगे, क्योंकि रिटेलर माशाल्लाह ले जाता है 45% और पब्लिशर साहब का भी हक बनता है. सो द कैरेक्टर हु क्रिएट्स द कंटेंट, सॉरी, not accepted. नहीं, you can send that to me as my gift for my anniversary or my birthday, but not, there's no substitute for buying the book. Huh? So, and it's also been selling well on Kindle and Amazon, so it's all right, not doing too badly. The first thing I'd like to submit is, please disengage if you can, which is very difficult to do, from the immediacy of 2023. If you want to make the mistake of reading the book or listening to me in the next, 20, 30 minutes or more or less, because we are overwhelmed by what is happening. We are living in such an age of immediacy, and that rascal in our pockets, which is both a devil and an angel, makes sure that we are trapped in immediacy. But that's not to escape the immediacy. I mean, what is happening today, the civil-military relationship, and the military's role is a very important part of the history of Pakistan as it is unfolding. So one is not meant to say, okay, let's disregard the present. It has a direct nexus with the subject of this book, the role of the military. And the role of the military in 1999-2000 when I was with General Musharraf, or the role of the military today in 2023, 15 years later. It is tempting to say that the more things change, the more they remain the same. Has anything changed? The Chief of Army Staff has changed. But has the army changed? Have politics changed? I have no definitive answers, but we can deal with that. This book is a personal political memoir. It is not a biography of General Musharraf. Neither is it an autobiography of the writer. Neither does it attempt to be a complete survey of his total tenure from 1999 to 2008. It is a record of my personal interactions with him and one's humble or not so humble perceptions about him as a person and him as a president and a person who was dealing with the political reality of Pakistan. Unfortunately, apart from Shaukat Aziz, who has written a book, I can't recall any other member of General Musharraf's cabinet writing about this experience. I wish there were more people who wrote. And I wrote it while he was alive. I sent him a copy, and of course, wisely he chose not to respond, because he may not have liked some parts of what I wrote. But Shaukat Aziz wrote a book called From Banking to the Thorny World of Politics. I don't know whether you've read it or some of you have seen it, but it was, in my humble view and prejudiced view, much more about himself than about General Musharraf. And he has every right to write his book, but I think one would have liked to learn more about General Musharraf and his interaction at crucial moments. In writing it, I've tried not to be judgmental, because it's very easy to take a holistic, not holistic is H-O-L, but H-O-L-Y a holier than thou attitude. You know, I'm a civilian, I'm a political person, and this is a general, a vardiwala. So how could he ever have any redeeming features? I was shocked yesterday, of all days. I get a WhatsApp message from a former general who will remain unnamed, who had, I don't want this to be recorded, it will have to be. But what shocked and pained me was that this officer had worked with him and had now taken a very different view in that message. I suppose he has his reasons. I'm again not wanting to be judgmental. So there is a chapter there in this book which tries to be self-critical, self-analytical about myself. Why did I join a military ruler's cabinet? When I'd got up in parliament and spoken against General Zia-ul-Haq, and I'd spoken against martial law and the intrusiveness of the military, and there I go and join. So I've shared my doubts about myself. I have also admitted that it probably was ambition, the sheer ego wanting to be a minister for the third time, score a hat trick, and put up the, bio data. That was also, I'm sure, part of it. But I've tried to be. I don't think I've entirely succeeded. Perhaps I should have been even more self-critical. My observations are in three parts. The first part deals with the closed-door dialogue and the interaction with President Bill Clinton and General Pervez Musharraf, which took place in this city, not too far from here, on the 25th of March 2000. That's 23 years and 3 months ago. And the second part of my observations will be about Musharraf's tenure, what he did right and what he did wrong. And that's part of the book. And the third is about our personal relationship. So about 10, 11 minutes on each of those, and then you'll be liberated. The book structure is about 300 pages, 45 chapters with annexures, and it starts from our first meeting 27 years ago and ends, of course, with just before his demise. I strongly recommend it because if you have difficulty falling asleep, this will help you very, very effectively. You may not get past the first 10 pages or so. So, say goodbye to insomnia. Let me begin with that first part. I was designated advisor on national affairs when I joined the cabinet. Advisor on national affairs and information and broadcasting. It was very generous and gracious of the general. He originally wanted me to be advisor on political affairs, but I said political affairs is a very partisan sounding kind of formulation. Make it national, readily agreed. So, when this came about, an indication from the US Ambassador Bill Milam, who is a good friend, lives in Washington DC now, that Mr. Clinton would like to consider visiting Pakistan. That stirred a debate within the government because it came with conditions. Condition 1, less than 12 hours is all I can spare after having spent several days in India. Islamabad, only a few hours. Number 2, no photographs. I will not be shown shaking hands with a military ruler. My. And the third condition, the right to speak directly to the people of Pakistan without censorship or editing through television and radio, live telecast. General Musharraf convened a small group and I was one of them, to give advice on this. I strongly opposed accepting those conditions. My domain was not foreign affairs, it was national affairs. And there was a very wise foreign minister at that time, Mr. Sattar, and there were others who gave much saner advice. But I said this is, an insult. An insult not just to General Musharraf, it's an insult to Pakistan. You're coming to a country and you're putting up these outrageous conditions. Say no. I know we need American recognition, de facto. Recognition diplomatically already exists. But we want, it would be very nice to have a US president coming during the tenure of a military ruler, but say no. We will not have this. Wisely, I was overruled because the others felt there were gains to be made, and I think they were right. But I don't regret saying that should have been our first. When the closed door dialogue began, but before that, charming to shake hands with Clinton. He was looking very robust, fresh from the Monica Lewinsky scandal, having brazenly had the courage and the gall to sit on television and redefine the meaning of sexual intercourse. I mean, this had not happened before. He outright denied, of course they did not, and he was probably right. But the man had this capacity to survive the Monica Lewinsky scandal. And while the hearings were going on live on television, his popularity rating was going up. So much for the wisdom and maturity of the American public, because they separated his capacity as an administrator, as a manager of the economy, and America in general. And they said, yes, that's probably his personal failing, but let's not hold that against him. So, it was very nice to see him, very robust, very good looking. And then in this room we went, and I was fortunate to be made part of the 6 people who General Musharraf invited to be part of the dialogue. On the other side were Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State, Sandy Berger, National Security Advisor, John Podesta, Chief of Staff with the White House, another person whose name I've listed, and the Ambassador, William Milam. And on our side was the Foreign Minister, and there was Maliha Lodi, who was our ambassador to the US, and there was General Ghulam Ahmad, my favorite general, alas, now gone, Chief of Staff to General Musharraf. And off we went into the dialogue. 35 minutes had been allocated for this dialogue. It lasted about 80 minutes. And as the dialogue proceeded, one could almost amusingly see Madeleine Albright and then Sandy Berger slipping little slips to Mr. Clinton, probably reminding him that it is not appropriate for you to extend the duration of this dialogue. You're supposed to be meeting a military dictator, and here you are going into extra time. But the nature of the dialogue changed from an initial stiffness, tension, a shade of nervous apprehension perhaps on the part of General Musharraf. But lo and behold, within 10 to 12 minutes, the atmosphere began to change. Clinton actually started to smile. He had started with a very impassive face. And within about 20 minutes, the conversation was flowing. I was the only one in that group who, for some bizarre reason, normally there are note takers and it's all pre-decided who's going to take notes. In this incredible case, as yet another example of Pakistani efficiency, no one had bothered to decide who is going to take notes. So I'm sure there was a secret listening device planted there by the ISI. It had to be. ये तो elementary चीज़ है. ISI is one of the world's finest intelligence gathering organizations. But what was even more surprising was that the Americans were not taking notes. But I'm sure that they were carrying a listening device, a recording device. So for whatever it's worth, I started making notes on my own. No one asked me to. And when I began writing this book, I realized that this is one of the pads in my papers that are still intact. So I've used that, and I mean, it's almost 99% accurate. 1% either or other maybe, but the meaning of what they said has not been changed in any way. And my God, the dialogue covered. Whew. First of all, Clinton emerges as someone who is genuinely interested in helping Pakistan. It's easy in diplomacy. Ambassador Zamir Akram, Ambassador Reza Saab, veterans. It's easy in diplomacy to put on a veneer and pretend, what you are not. But you can also tell. And as the text of the dialogue will reveal, there are elements where his sincerity comes through. And look at the canvas that was covered in those 80 minutes plus, and later another session. Nuclear weapons, the signing of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, the Taliban, relations with India, Kashmir, the status of women in Afghanistan, and categorical statements by him about what the US would do if there was to be an outbreak of war between Pakistan and India, that the US will not intervene. I want to inflict on you, perhaps, excerpts from that dialogue, because I know all of you are never going to buy this book. But just for the sake of the record, we owe it to him. Somewhere along, he says, I've spent considerable time studying the history of Kashmir. Madeleine Albright's father, Joseph Corbell, had led the Kashmir study group, so he was familiar with it. But later he says, reminding the general who actually did the opposite after the February 1999 visit by Vajpayee to Lahore and his historic acceptance of the Minar-e-Pakistan, vagara, vagara. He says, the Lahore process or some version of it should be revived. My talking with the Indians and with you shall be empty of meaning if there is no evidence of progress. Vajpayee is a smart man. When he went to Lahore, he understood what he was doing. I went to different parts of India, Hyderabad, Rajasthan, for example. They did not talk about Kashmir. You have to find some way to create a comprehensive process. If Kashmir is the only issue for you, then we are headed for disaster. Your nuclear deterrent is not enough to stop a war. We will not intervene. I feel strongly about the dangers to this region. And he repeats later, there is no military solution to the Kashmir dispute. And he says elsewhere, no country ever parts with its territory. And if you two countries resolve your disputes, you could roar ahead past China. To his credit, he condemns the Taliban in unequivocal terms. And he says the contrasting attitude of the Taliban to women is barbaric. You should use your influence, blah, blah, blah. When he cautions, he says in the last 30 years, all major leaders in South Asia have died violent deaths. I know that there were children on board the aircraft which your Prime Minister asked to divert, and it was a very threatening situation. So Musharraf interrupts and says there were American children also on board. He says, yes, I know that. And then he throws the non-proliferation bait to him. And Musharraf talks about how he extended the willing support of the armed forces to help Nawaz Sharif's government. But I want to quote Clinton. He says, why don't you sign the CTBT, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty? You can put India into a corner on that. And then it's refreshing. A Democrat like Bill Clinton couldn't resist his partisanship. So at one point, talking about nuclear weapons, he says, the Republicans want more nuclear bombs. They are crazy. So do share that with the Republican Party in Washington, D.C. And he asks him, from your viewpoint, is there a solution to Kashmir that does not involve separation of Kashmir from India? And very adroitly, to his credit, Pervez Musharraf says, there are a number of possible solutions. We will not be rigid. A middle line somewhere between the Indian position and our position, perhaps. And he puts the question to him. So, Osama bin Laden also comes up. And Clinton concludes his reference by saying, can we buy Osama bin Laden? Can we buy him? And Musharraf says, I can't say for sure, but I will try. And then Clinton goes on to say, I want it conveyed to the Taliban, to bin Laden, that I opposed unilateral action against the Taliban on the OBL, on the Osama bin Laden issue. So, what makes this dialogue special? It came at a time when, very clearly, the United States had made a decision to align with India, and they had already sensed, when you talk to Strope Talbot, who I used to meet there, Strope Talbot was a major figure in the administration, and his book also reveals that they had taken that decision. And yet we find an American president who was willing to be helpful to Pakistan. Very immediately after the 80 minutes, they wanted a one-on-one session. So all of us left the room. And again, they said, we'll take 5 minutes. And it took 20 minutes. And no one else was present. And one can only speculate what was said. I've never asked Musharraf what was said. But one can only assume that as he did during the dialogue, he wanted an assurance that Nawaz Sharif would not be executed. And as he said, and it's recorded here in the dialogue, that Musharraf gave him the assurance, the trial, I'm not interfering with it, and whatever will be done according to the law. And obviously, in that one-on-one session, Clinton must have, because it was only 9 months earlier that Nawaz Sharif had rushed to Washington, D.C. on the 4th of July. And he was in such a rush that he didn't even consult the then foreign ministers, Mr. Sartaj Aziz, who was, I think, coming back from Africa. And the foreign secretary was coming back from China. And without consulting the foreign minister or the foreign secretary, according to the records I know, he went off to Washington, D.C. So, in that session, there must have been this and then the discussion on what to do with Kashmir and so on. But that's for them to write about. What is interesting is that dear General Musharraf writes his book In the Line of Fire, published in 2006, and makes only 2 cursory references to Clinton. No reflection of this first ever dialogue between him and Clinton. Very disappointing. It was ghostwritten by someone who I will not name, but I'm surprised that General Musharraf didn't realize the value of that interaction. And to his credit, Bill Clinton, when he published his own autobiography 2 years before In the Line of Fire, which is called My Life, he recalled this meeting and he made some very interesting references to General Musharraf. He says on page 903 of that book, in my meetings with Musharraf, I saw why he had emerged from the complex, often violent culture of Pakistani politics. He was clearly intelligent, strong, and sophisticated. If he chose to pursue a peaceful, progressive path, I thought he had a fair chance to succeed. But I told him I thought terrorism would eventually destroy Pakistan from within if he didn't move against it. Musharraf said he didn't believe Sharif would be executed, but he was non-committal on the other issues. I knew he was still trying to solidify his position and was in a tough spot. Sharif subsequently was released into exile in Jeddah with the United States in the war against terror. When Musharraf began serious cooperation with the US in the war against terror after 9/11, it remained a risky course for him. In 2003, he survived 2 assassination attempts within days of each other. So, to be fair to Clinton, he did justice to the importance of the visit. And the visit became even more important because in that autobiography, President Clinton says possibly the only time I overruled my own Secret Service was the decision to visit Islamabad. He said because the Secret Service had very strongly urged him not to visit Islamabad because of security threats and intelligence that they had in advance that they would make an attempt to fire at the aircraft or get him during his visit. And he said, I overruled it because I believed that to build peace in South Asia, my visit was going to have some relevance or importance. So that's another very commendable action on the part of President Clinton. Looking at the future, going beyond the book is just a device to introduce the subject. How dissimilar we are as two countries, not just in terms of, economic size or military might. Look at the paradox that the United States is a country built through mass migration from Europe after the 16th century. Here come initially hundreds, then thousands, then hundreds of thousands, and they systematically reduce the indigenous population from about 60 million to today's 6 million. If that isn't genocide, I don't know what is. Systematic reduction, diminution of these hundreds of Native Americans who still now proudly call themselves First Nations. In contrast, Pakistan, with woe-begotten migrants like myself and Mr. Maikri's parents, and I'm sure Abu Aqif's parents, we come here and we are dominated by Punjabis, by Baloch, by Pakhtun, by Sindhis. I even go and marry a Kashmiri Punjaban. My God. हम बेचारे उर्दू बोलने वाले आज भी बहुत ही कम तादाद में हैं. ये सारे जालिम पंजाबीज और पख्तून्स हमारे दिली जिगरी दोस्त ये मेजॉरिटी है. So Pakistan is a much more humanely constructed country. It didn't take over someone else's land. It didn't reduce the population of the original indigenous people. The indigenous people हावी हैं और हावी रहें. अलबत्ता याद रहे उर्दू जबान हम लेकर आए और वो आपकी नेशनल जबान है. It is spoken mother tongue only 9% of the population. So may all the regional languages and Urdu prosper side by side. But also, I mean, purely from the point of view of symmetry, the United States is a very symmetrical country. 50 states, a true federation. Yes, some are very small, New Hampshire or Vermont. But Pakistan is the world's most asymmetrical federation. No federation on the planet is like Pakistan. One province, 47% of the territory. One province, 52% of the population. MashaAllah. जिस तरह हम पैदा भी हुए, बेढंगे, crazily constructed, 1,000 miles separating two wings. Fantastic. What a country. A dream country, which was given only 6 months to survive, but we survived in that form for 24 years. What an achievement. But compared to the US, we are a very asymmetrical country. And whether that asymmetry is something we should continue to live with or reconstruct is one of the challenges. And economy में तो मैं comparison करना ही नहीं चाहता, but $21 trillion एक तरफ, $1 trillion एक तरफ. We have no military bases outside Pakistan, even though we go and help some neighbors sometimes. That country across the Atlantic, 800 military bases. 800. I mean, I sometimes think these big countries are actually more insecure than small countries. What is the need for this completely disproportionate locationing of 800 military bases around the world, and then getting all steamed up if China sends a fleet into the South China Sea or attempts something near Somalia? Absurdity. And in terms of last point, the future, how will the future go? Look at the location. The US enjoys this unique advantage, Atlantic on the left or Pacific on the right, no threat from any land-based neighbor. Pakistan, from the word go, two hostile neighbors on land, Afghanistan and India. Both didn't want Pakistan to live. So these two very dissimilar countries, the future, well, should be based on Pakistan's own assertion of self-worth. Instead of parroting this phrase, superpower, superpower hai. The use of this word superpower induces an inferiority and a lack of self-worth. The more you use this term, superpower, superpower. Yes, call it a major power, a dominant power. The worst example of lack of self-esteem in many, I'm sorry to say, educated Pakistanis was evident about 4 months ago. A leading citizen of Karachi, who will remain unnamed, invites the new US ambassador and about 25 of us. I was misinvited. And he begins his welcome remarks to the US ambassador by saying, Excellency, Pakistan is in a state of profound crisis. All our institutions are broken down. The judiciary, the executive, parliament, the civil-military relationship. Went on and on and on as if he was addressing the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Pakistan or the Ombudsman. I couldn't believe my ears. And this is a gentleman who is well educated, is associated with public discourse. मुझसे रहा नहीं गया. Not because I'm Tismar Khan. I interrupted. I said, sorry host, I haven't come here to see you treat the US ambassador as the solution to our problems. We know our problems and we know the solutions. We've come here to learn about his country and his country's problem. How are they dealing with the black-white relationship? How are they dealing with the Republican House and a Democratic Senate? How are they dealing with abortion? How are they dealing with immigrants? All this. Why are you asking him to solve our problems? Yeah. But this didn't matter because the second speaker also proceeded to lay out as if the US ambassador has all the solutions in his pocket. I'm not trying to sound superior, but what kind of attitude is this? Of complete subjugation and self-abnegation and self-denial that Pakistanis are not worth anything? Every solution will have to come from Uncle Sam. My God. No enemy would want an easier way to break down the morale and self-confidence of a whole country if its leading citizens are thinking on these lines. Let me come to the second part, which is Musharraf's tenure. And I'll just reel off the positives and the negatives. First, a visionary local government concept of destructuring the conventional system, introducing the Nazims with much more power. Second, for the first time, reserved seats for women, 33% in all the local government, 17% in all the other legislatures, never happened before. Restoring the joint electorate. Actually, our non-Muslims have 2 votes. Us poor Muslims have only 1 vote. Non-Muslims can vote for non-Muslim candidates on reserved seats and they can vote on the general seats. And in the last election, 3 non-Muslims, Hindus of Sindh, defeated Muslim candidates on open seats as a direct result of reforms introduced during our time. His support to culture and the arts, the National Academy of Performing Arts, is generally liberal, kind of progressive attitude. The economy stirred with consumerism, which is a bad thing, but certainly a very active economy. Freedom of electronic media, evolving the 4-point formula on Kashmir for dialogue with India to take it forward towards a possible resolution. Plenty of infrastructural improvements in Sindh and Balochistan, and a watered down women's rights protection bill in 2006. The negatives, holding that bogus referendum in the year 2001 to extend his own tenure. Second, just the decision to ignore the Supreme Court's ruling that you can stay for 3 years, you can even amend the Constitution, a power that he had not asked for, and the Supreme Court gave it to him. Which reminds me, a little diversion back to the visit by Clinton. After the open door session, we proceeded to lunch. I was seated at the table next to the central table where Clinton and Musharraf were seated. And Clinton, being a good human being with his natural needs, asked where he could find the washroom. Now, it's not normal for heads of state to head for the washroom in full public view, but he proceeded to the washroom. But within a minute of his going to the washroom, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Irshad Hassan Khan, also felt the need to go to the washroom. So, we never know what happened in that one-on-one dialogue while both gentlemen, something very significant and profound must have taken place, because both of them realized they were human, that they were men. They had natural needs. So the same Supreme Court gave us 3 years, but Musharraf didn't want to stay for 3 years, he wanted more. His attitude towards religious extremists, despite his liberalism, was ambivalent. And the worst example was his tolerance of Lal Masjid and Lal Masjid types, which then became monstrous. It should have been far more clear. His alignment with the PMLQ, and then Balochistan, disastrously. When that rape incident took place of Dr. Shazia Khalid in Sui, and an army captain was involved. A needless defense of the indefensible, alienated so many segments, whoever was, actually responsible or not responsible. That was a terrible misjudgment. Followed soon after by another major misjudgment in how to deal with Nawab Akbar Bukti. He was not an easy person to deal with. But the way the government handled that whole episode, leading to the tragic accidental death of Nawab Bukti, gave others the opportunity to portray it as cold-blooded murder, which it was not. It was caused by an explosion that took place in the cave that Bukti was using. But since that time, the alienation of the people of Balochistan has grown much sharper than it was. It's now modulating itself. The dismissal of the Chief Justice Iftikhar Chaudhry, whether he was capable of holding that position or not, considering his mad judgments on Reko Dik, but that was a very badly handled episode. And the crowning glory, NRO, the imposition of that useless emergency for 5 weeks in 2007, followed by the NRO, and the handing over of terrorists demanded by CIA and FBI. So, where he did some very good positive things. And I want to recommend to you a book that is not very good book worth reading, written by Murtaza Razvi. He used to be a senior journalist at Dawn, published in 2009, an extremely balanced, critical, and yet appreciative survey of Musharraf's years in power. The author was tragically killed in Karachi shortly after this book was published, but it's worth reading. Many chapters. One of the reasons why it's worth reading is he quotes me extensively, but that's only a secondary reason. The third and the last part, fortunately, and you will be relieved after this, is my personal relationship. It started as a warm, very friendly relationship, and ironically, since it was a PIA plane that brought him to power, our relationship began in a PIA plane when we were traveling together, and he introduced himself and we started getting along. And became such good friends that he often shared some ultra-sensitive information which I will not disclose, but that's the level of trust we developed. He did not allow his becoming Chief of Army Staff to go to his head. There was no change in his manner, in his friendliness, no arrogance, nor when he became Chairman Joint Chiefs. But after becoming Chief Executive, I began to notice gradual, subtle changes taking place in who I thought was a very good friend. He remained a friend, but there were flashes of both naivety and sometimes this adrenaline of power, the addiction that comes with power. Very difficult to resist it. The attitude, I know it all, I know it all. And because of this I know it all attitude, allowing the ISPR, allowing with great respect to the ISPR, which is very ably represented here, and I have to be very careful because I don't know what will happen if I say anything about the ISPR. Brigadier Imran Naqvi, who is such a fine officer and example, he helped make that documentary possible with your invaluable support. It could not have been done. But dragging GHQ and ISPR into the work of the Information Ministry, which should not have happened, becoming an irritant. Most disturbingly, when I began to remind him in about March 2000 about finalizing an exit strategy as to when will you leave office, you have to start thinking now. Even though the Supreme Court has given us 3 years, given you 3 years, Don't wait till then, start now. He said, why don't you write out a paper? I wrote out a paper, and the paper is part of the book. Then I said, let's get together and discuss it with the kitchen cabinet of generals, General Aziz and General Mahmood, DGISI. That meeting never took place. And this reluctance to talk about the exit strategy was the beginning of my decision to exit from the cabinet. But amazingly, after letting me be advisor with federal minister status, in June he wants me to become federal minister as a minister. I was very touched. I took oath from President Rafiq Tarar, who had survived and who's still there. And I want to acknowledge that the only general who really wanted to discuss the exit strategy was the late dear General Ghulam Ahmad. What an officer, sense of humor, the best interests of the country at heart, very decent, noble soul, tragically killed in a car crash a few weeks before 9/11. If General Ghulam Ahmad had lived, many of the decisions that General Musharraf took would not have been the kind of disastrous decisions he took. I had already left the cabinet, so I can't claim that my presence would have made any difference. So finally, when he said, information maybe shayad kuch karna padega, वगैरह, so naive, not understanding कि you can't expect the press or the media to be always positive. There has to be negatives. And he was tolerant. But when I decided firmly that I have to go, after briefing him on my last meeting with Benazir Bhutto in Damascus, we finally parted. And even though he graced the occasion when my son Kamal got married in December 2002, our relationship never really returned to what it was. When he settled in Karachi, we became again very good social acquaintances. He was very hospitable, great fun to be with in the evenings. Whenever Rooh Afza was served, it was so nice to explore different color variations of Rooh Afza, and the water supply was very good also in our neighborhood. And one always will treasure memories, very pleasant. And when finally the tragedy of his demise, and I find myself in Malir cantonment with these thousands of people standing there as his coffin is brought, it was truly very, very distressing. And that is when I said to myself, why don't I write, okay, what if? What if? Is there any point in writing what if? Because everything has happened. So now why write what if? But I couldn't resist it. Since I'm very bad at resisting temptation, Oscar Wilde said it well, no? The only way to deal with temptation is to give in to it. Right? So I wrote an essay called What If for South Asia magazine. And I said, what if Pervez Musharraf had respected the 3-year time limit and said, this is the time I've been given, I'm now handing over, the country should hold elections, I take 2 years off after he retires, you can't go into politics. He goes in, should do social service, serve with NGOs, public service organizations, do something other than politics. And after 2 years, come back in about 2003, 2004, and tell the people, here I am. I gave up power when I had it. This is my record in 3 years. All the positives I read out. Now you decide, you think you want to vote for me. I had a feeling that he would have received a very warm reception because the disillusionment with the political options was still very high. And that's a what if. May his soul rest in peace. Thank you very much for your patience. I'll take questions if you have any or comments. Thank you very much.
seems we have a few questions for you, sir, as you left us with this talk of yours. I think we will be taking about 3 to 4, sir. All right.
This is Vakarmati. I'm from the News International, and it was a wonderful talk. In such a short period, you have covered many aspects of your association with General Musharraf. You spoke about Taliban and the meeting with the Clinton Saab and what he did with the in Balochistan. But have you mentioned anything about the revival of MQM, which was almost dead when he took over? He revived the monster that killed thousands of people in Karachi, wiped out entire MQM Hakiki, killed hundreds of Pashtuns and Punjabis and his own people. What was your feeling at that time, and have you touched that? Because I haven't read your book. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Tizad, mashallah, outstanding journalist on health and development issues in Pakistan. I just want to clarify that the worst period of MQM's dominance in Karachi was really in the 1990s. I'm not disputing that even in the year 2000 onwards, after General Musharraf took over, they achieved a revival and they did much that was very bad for the city and the country. But the real mayhem they caused was between 1986 and till General Asif Nawaz and others took that very strong action against them, and then it ebbed a little. In Musharraf's time, yes, he thought that MQM would give him a useful alternative and a challenge to weakening the People's Party and any other forces in urban Sindh or rural Sindh. Halanki MQM was not a force in rural Sindh. And yes, he should not have done it. I don't deal at length with this subject because I did not really get involved in that 1 year that I was with him in the first year. We were focused so much on all the reforms that institutionally General Tanveer Naqvi, to his great credit, was working on in National Reconstruction Bureau, and some of them were announced while I was still there, some of them came later, that we did not focus on MQM. And I certainly never recommended that he should align himself with that entity. I have the honor of contesting for the National Assembly in 2002 against MQM from their strongest constituency, which was New Karachi, North Karachi. And I have the distinction of losing spectacularly to MQM. Knowing that I would not win, I said we've got to challenge the MQM on their home ground. So I challenged them, and I was not surprised that we lost very hugely. But one had to challenge it. So I agree with you. Then that terrible incident of May, when when Chaudhry Iftikhar was coming to Karachi, and MQM was used to cause bloodshed on the streets, and very, very. I don't want to use the word unforgivable. Who am I to forgive or not forgive? But very ill-advised that he should not have done.
Sir, our next question.
Ji.
Great pleasure to see you.
Thank you, sir.
Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
You have jogged my memory
Sure.
because I was the additional secretary Americas in the foreign
Oh, yeah.
and I organized the visit from the Pakistan side.
Yes.
And
MashaAllah.
two things, you have said a lot,
No.
two things that came to my mind. One, that in the lunch,
Yes.
he said, I came to the subcontinent with two purposes.
Yes.
One was to make India-Pakistan talk,
Yes.
and the other was to make the two ladies sit together in Bangladesh.
Yes.
And that was Khalda Zia.
Yes, Hasina.
Wajid.
Yes.
So he said, I have succeeded in that, but I haven't succeeded in this. And that raised a big laughter.
Quite right, quite. I was not at the main table, but I know what you mean. I heard that this had been said.
Yes.
But in a way, he did, sorry, Nafizat, in a way, the 4-point formula eventually later,
Yes.
It came up 3 or 4 years later as a result of track 2 and so on.
Track two,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So, yeah, it was, and the other thing that comes to my mind is that the military general who was coordinating with me,
Yeah.
he said it's a good thing that he went before sunset because these guys have this stinger and we don't
I
know
know.
what might have
Yes,
happened.
exactly.
So he stayed here
Up to-
from about 11 or 12 till
Quite
5.
right, quite right. Bilkul. Thank you very much for informing everyone and reminding one. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Ambassador.
We have a few
Sagar.
questions on this side. Sir, we go to you and then we'll come to you and then to you, sir. And then to you, of course.
My name is Abid Rizvi, और luckily मैं इनसे बहुत ही humbly associated हूँ for the last 25 years.
MashaAllah.
गुजारिश I am very lucky कि मैंने ये किताब कहीं न कहीं से हासिल करके पढ़ ली ये किताब और उस किताब में 2-3 चीज़ें ऐसी हैं जो शायद आपके जहन में नहीं रही आपने नहीं जिक्र किया मसलन राइट ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन जो बिल आया था वो आपकी एफर्ट्स की वजह से आया था और इसी तरह से एक ये एहतसाब कमीशन जो था वो नैब बन गया था गिविंग मोर शार्प टीथ नैब बना दिया था तो इसलिए ये था कि आपने चैनल्स जो नेशनल एयरवेज थे प्राइवेटाइज किए थे और रेडियो के और टीवी के बहुत से चैनल्स आ गए थे और जाहिर है कि इसके पीछे एक कोई ख़ास मकसद था मकसद जो मीडिया का हो सकता है पॉसिबली यही टू एजुकेट द पीपल टू इन्फॉर्म द पीपल टू एंटरटेन द पीपल लेकिन बाद में आपसे गुफ्तगू के दौरान महसूस हुआ था और किताब में भी कहीं थोड़ा सा इशारा मिलता है कि वो मकसद हासिल नहीं हुआ जो आप चाहते थे पूछना ये था कि क्या मुशर्रफ साहब की भी राय यही थी कि वो मकसद हासिल नहीं हुआ
Thank you. Even though I left before it was actually implemented, it was implemented with a very bad, you see, once you make a law, then you have to make proper policy and rules. I had written out some of the rules and some elements of the policy, which was not to indiscriminately hand out licenses to anyone who could qualify on the financial basis, but to give much more weightage to journalistic credentials, to capacity of the owner to recognize the value of journalism and not just money to create a channel. That advice was not implemented. Licenses were handed out liberally, and also I had cautioned against making existing media groups also owners of TV channel because it would concentrate too much power in certain groups. That advice was also bypassed because General Musharraf had inducted, I think, Sheikh Rashid's time. By his time, this policy was being implemented. But I don't want to blame individuals. The buck stops with General Musharraf. I did occasionally write to him to remind him of the real objectives, which is to have a reasonable choice of views and opinions, but not every, I mean, I don't want to say it disparagingly, every Tom, Dick and Harry could have a channel, up to her because of YouTube now, every Tom, Dick, Harry, Sally and Auntie Sally and her niece can also have channel. There are thousands of channels. So anyway, so we shared some of those misgivings. जी
आपने फरमाया था कि ये कोई बहुत ही अहम किताब इसलिए नहीं है कि ये ना मुशर्रफ के पीरियड का किया है और ना
It's a memoir. जी
मेरी राय ये है कि इस किताब के अंदर कुछ लैंडमार्क्स इतने अहम हैं लाइक ये मीडिया का लाके लाइफस्टाइल चेंज कर दिया लोगों का इतनी बड़ी बात होती है इसी तरह और 2-3 स्टेप्स ऐसे हैं वो चीज़ें जो हैं इट्स नॉट अ होल बुक कम से कम वो हिस्सा जो है वो सिलेबस में आना चाहिए
very kind of you. And to be fair, Ruzi Saab, I just want to clarify that credit should go to Professor Khurshid Ahmed of the Jamaat-e-Islami. When he and I were members of the Senate 85 to 91, he is the first person who introduced a private member's bill on right to freedom of information, on freedom of information. I was the only senator who supported him. And the government of the day unfortunately opposed the enactment of that bill into an act of the Senate and then of the National Assembly. The credit should go to him. However, in the caretaker government of Farooq Lagari and Miraj Khalid, on which I've written separately, we introduced the Freedom of Information Ordinance. And again, mashallah, the elected government of Nawaz Sharif Saab did not convert it into an act of parliament. Like the EMRA law, we had originally introduced electronic media privatization in January 1997. So we could have had private channels 4 or 5 years before Musharraf introduced them again in 2002. So these are the ironies of democracy. The unelected governments did more for freedom of expression than elected governments.
We've taken a few questions from this side, sir. Allow me to take 2 from here and then we'll come to you. Abdullah, please pass the mic. Sir. जेंडर को थोड़ा हाथ खड़ा करना पड़ेगा.
जनरल मुशर्रफ जिसने इतना किया जेंडर इक्विटी के लिए 33% सीट्स जी फरमाइए
जी. So this is good, Captain Hali. You were kind enough to review my book, Tormented Truth, 1971 and beyond. My question really is about President Musharraf having visited Bangladesh, and he was asked to apologize, and you mentioned it in your articles, etc. He did not formally apologize, but he made some apologetic comments in the guest book. But my question really is that it was expected that being a Muhajir himself, he would have a soft corner for the stranded Biharis. In your documentary, you have touched this subject very, very profoundly. And I've written also a whole chapter in my book. You were kind enough to comment. Why was it so that he refused to take any action or even offer any comment on this?
He commented on it, but he did not take action. And I agree with you that this I should have listed as a failure also. But ironically, even elected governments have failed. We have been willing to admit 4 million Afghan refugees, and we do not have the grace to allow 200 to 300,000 people who to this day are proud to be Pakistanis. My God, and have suffered so much. It was due to the resistance from certain nationalist forces in Pakistan, in West Pakistan, that they could dilute the character of Sindh and Balochistan and Punjab, which is utterly untrue. It would not. Look at the population growth, mashallah. We produce more babies every year than those 200,000. Kya fark pad jata agar wo aate? And to the credit of those people who are called Biharis in a pejorative way, very unfairly, you will never see a Bihari begging. They are so self-willed, so dignified. They will work, and they would not have been a liability on Pakistan. They would have worked and earned their own rizq. And so it's a great failure. I agree. He should have authorized that. He was in a position to take that tough. There would have been resistance and reaction. Because, for example, he ill-advisedly, without my prior agreement or knowledge, he suddenly said there should be the Kalabagh Dam. Now, Kalabagh Dam in Sindh, you cannot have a fact-based discussion. It is just too emotive an issue. And by the time you sort out the facts and you agree on facts, you've already lost it. So he had this tendency to be impetuous. I know it all. I can handle it. Sometimes it's okay, but sometimes that is not the right way to go about it. So one still grieves for those 200,000 waiting to come to Pakistan.
So, taking advantage of my role as an MOC, I will be announcing that the last 4 people who raised their hands will be asking their questions, which includes Sir you, Madam yourself, Sir, and Mr. Amir Ghori Saab. So, with that being said, Abdullah, please pass on the mic in exactly that. You already have one, all right.
May I? We don't know each other. Okay. On economy, you said, you talked about the success, economic success, and then, like a professional economist, you said it was consumption based. But were you aware, as information minister, not just an information minister, an outspoken information minister, that figure fudging had become an art form? Were you aware? Under his very nose, Mr. Shaukat Aziz was
Say, no, I was not, at that time, I was not as aware as I later became. So I must say that when I served in the cabinet, I was not aware that fudging was already going on and a very misleading representation was being done. I agree. And thank you, erudite economist Dr. Pervez, who writes so acerically every week in Express Tribune. Thank you for pointing that out.
Ma'am, you may pose your question, and then Ambassador, you may.
Thank you so much, just to ensure gender balance. So thank you, Javed sir. Congratulations for having another book. I just want to add one thing that you have mentioned about the regime of Musharraf, and he has taken a lot of courageous steps, is the amendment in Hudud ordinances as well. So that was a very brave step of him, and I just wanted to bring him to record.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, Arifa Madar Sahiba. She's a leading women's activist and chief executive of SPO. When I said the positives, Arifa Sahiba, the last positive I referred to was the Women's Protection Rights Bill, but it was a very watered down version, and it did not satisfy intiha pasands like me or yourself. You are not an intiha pasand. I am an extremist. He could have done much more. He had that authority to overrule the mullahs, and the Women's Protection Bill could have been much more effective. Hudud ordinances ko khatam kar dete. What he did was, in that provision, whereas previously the police could handle rape cases, he brought up the Sessions Court. A judge of the Sessions Court had to give his approval for registration of cases and so on. So there were some improvements. And he tended to sometimes do the wrong thing, got into that scrap with a lady, 2 women in New York on an argument, and that completely distorted what he wanted to do, and he said something very inappropriate. The way that impetuousness on his part was sometimes a liability, even though he meant well, but he was not, I just want to say, he was not a cold-blooded, callous person. And, sometimes he's accused of, look at the irony. On the night before the death of Benazir Bhutto, he personally sent the DG ISI to her, asking her not to go next day to that meeting. Now, anyone who was wanting to get rid of Benazir, Khuda na khasta, why would he do that? I mean, he said to her, they said to her, we have intelligence from the UAE, from the Saudi Arabian intelligence agencies, that someone is going to do something. So don't go. And she insisted on going. And then she insisted on standing up. That was the lethal, the worst thing to do. And it is said that someone encouraged her to stand up. Asked her to come up.
We'll be taking the question from Ambassador and then Mr. Amir Ghori, and
I thought Amir, you wanted to? Yes. Amir Ghori. Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry.
Sir, I am Ambassador Sajjad.
जी.
हाली साहब की बात को मैं थोड़ा सा ऐड कर सकूं.
परवेज मुशर्रफ साहब जब बांग्लादेश गए थे ढाका, तो उन्होंने वहाँ की मॉन्यूमेंट पर एक लिखा था, सवार मॉन्यूमेंट पर, और उसका खुलासा ये था कि कौमों को आगे बढ़ना चाहिए। और नेक्स्ट डे जो वो बिल्कुल उनकी हैंड रिटन वो चीज़ पब्लिश हुई, तो तकरीबन 10,000 के करीब लोग जो है ना उनकी इस्तकबाल के लिए मौजूद हुए। उनके ज़माने में पाकिस्तान बांग्लादेश का रिलेशनशिप बिल्कुल ही डिफरेंट फ्रेंडली रिलेशनशिप के तौर पर आया। सर, मैं 2-3 चीज़ें आपसे ये पूछना चाहूँगा कि US relationship with neighboring countries of Pakistan, they have the bearing on Pakistan also, like that of US relation with China, US relation with Iran. Frankly speaking, we don't have equal relationship with US. It is unequal relationship. Keeping in view the post-Modi visit, how would you see that relationship vis-a-vis Pakistan? Number one. Number two, in the context of that he being a person in uniform, but he introduced a lot of media reforms. How do you see that type of freedom at that time and current, in the current situation? And a very small, that the negatives, where would you rate the negatives? 1, 2, 3, 4 has, like that of against the Chief Justice, or military operation in Balochistan, that one. So 1, 2, 3, how would you rate? Thank you.
Last question. The very first negative would be his decision to extend his tenure beyond 3 years. He should have respected the Supreme Court judgment and exited office in 3 years. That was the root of the problem. And that further aggravated his addiction or his fondness for power. So that was number one. And the second would be the very insensitive handling of Balochistan, despite his good work in infrastructure. You know, infrastructure की एक बड़ी मज़ेदार बात आपको बताऊं कि गवादर के करीब एक डैम बनाया है, और उस डैम के पानी के बचने की वजह से ड्यूरिंग मुशर्रफ्स टाइम in a very drought prone area, fish have been cultivated on a large scale. And the people were so happy with Musharraf for doing it that they called the machli Musharraf Machli. Because they said this is Musharraf's gift to Balochistan. So to go from that positive kind of thing to that terrible handling of Balochistan. And third, of course, on religious extremism, not being clear and tough enough, despite the assassination attempts on him, he could have afforded to be tougher with them. He overestimated their value. The second question was on, your second question was on? No, with the US now. It has to be an unequal relationship. I mean, virtually every country in the world, except China perhaps, and even China, has an unequal relationship with the United States. We will simply have to manage that inequality in a way that does not damage us. And the only way to do that is to reform ourselves immensely and comprehensively and become more capable, more self-reliant, not insulated like North Korea, but more self-reliant. And that alone will address this issue of gross inequality. We are in one way equal, equally or unequally equal, because we cannot forget the distinction of being a nuclear weapon power. So America can never underestimate Pakistan's importance. However much they may be aligned with India, Pakistan is a very important country from a global strategic point of view. And even though nuclear weapons are not going to improve our governance or our family planning or our education system or all the other ills with the United States, it will help ensure some kind of symmetry. And the third, the middle question was?
Press freedom.
Press freedom. I think there is a strange duality to press freedom in Pakistan. On the one hand, we have this terrible instance of journalists like Imran Riaz Khan disappearing, which is unforgivable. We have the tragedy of Arshad Sharif being assassinated, unforgivable. And yet at the same time, last night on a television channel, one prominent journalist was openly naming the previous Chief of Army Staff as being responsible for many of the negative policies of Imran Khan's government and even the current government, and holding the army openly responsible. Now, that kind of freedom of expression, I assure you, does not exist in any of the 54 countries of the Organization of the Islamic Conference. We have the most pluralist, open media system in the entire Muslim world. And people might say that's no big claim. Of course it is. I mean, 54 countries out of 193, representing almost 2 billion people. And Pakistan's media ecology is very open. But the coercive pressures on media are also very unforgivable. It's very inappropriate. It is a self-defeating policy. One journalist disappears and we get a bad name around the world, and we desecrate the principles of respect for human dignity.
We will be taking the last question from Sir.
Not happen in Musharraf's time. To his credit, I can't recall any major incident where a journalist was made to disappear, unless my memory has slipped.
This is Anu, a journalist. It has always been a pleasure listening to you. And I've been a great fan, not great, fan me, of your playing with words. I loved, when I saw the first, picture when it was sent to me, a general in particular. I loved the title. And I've been a fan since you used to write, great copy for लॉरेंस पोर के कपड़ों के लिए भी, ठीक है, हर औरत जो है वो दलाइला है. मेरा क्वेश्चन जो है, as a wonderful practitioner of the art of public speaking, how would you comment जो इस वक्त पाकिस्तान के अंदर जो leaders हैं of the people, or of millions, the language they use, the way they actually basically deal with each other in their absence, but on national media. वो अल्फाज जो इस्तेमाल करते हैं ऑक्सफर्ड से पढ़ने के बाद, कैम्ब्रिज से पढ़ने के बाद, हार्वर्ड से पढ़ने के बाद, ठीक है ना, पंजाब यूनिवर्सिटी और कराची यूनिवर्सिटी को छोड़ दें. Where do you see, पाकिस्तान के अंदर जो पॉलिटिक्स है, एक ऐसे वक्त में जबकि a great majority of Pakistan is young and they're all followers of these characters. Where do you see us going as a society?
Thank you. Knowingly making this into a mutual admiration society. Let me say that one admires your writing and journalism, and thank you very much for your remarks. The first temptation is to say we are going downhill fast. Are they setting an example which young characters sitting behind us, the future of Pakistan? Incidentally, अभी तो मैं भी जवान हूँ, हम भी future का हिस्सा रहेंगे, अल्लाह करे. But truly, what kind of role models have they become? Degraded. Oh, equally yesterday जहाँ एक अजीब व गरीब चीज़ देखी जहाँ जनरल बाजवा का नाम लिया गया, उनको जिम्मेदार ठहराया गया. Equally, I was so offended by a certain federal minister's language about the former prime minister. It was shocking to see someone speak with such lack of decorum and appropriateness that yes, they are setting a terrible example, but most people in Pakistan, I think, are mature enough to treat it with the contempt it deserves, that they will rise above it. Most people are very decent people. Pakistani people, mashallah, are very respectful of each other, generally. हालांकि बाज़ दफ़ा पब्लिक स्पेसेस में हमारा बिहेवियर भी बड़ा ख़राब हो जाता है, but I still have faith in them. So the example has to be set by the Prime Minister, it has to be set by the whole cabinet, regardless of which party they belong to. The cabinet and the federal government and the four provincial government, they have responsibility for setting the tone and the content of discourse. And we wait for that to happen.
Thank you so much, sir, for taking these. It came pretty late, but sure.
Ji.
You said that Akbar Bukhti's death was not a murder. It was an accident. I think it was murder. Has anyone ever tried to understand why every regime, including that of Musharraf's, was so petrified of this man? Why? They were petrified of this man, an educated, sophisticated, decent man. He spent so many evenings at our house, he was open in all his discussions. He used to tell me, pointing to some pictures in my sitting room, आप लोग थे ये झंडा उठा के आ गए थे पाकिस्तान पर हमें. Used to say that openly. But, and also, at one point he stopped speaking in Urdu. He spoke continuously his own language or English. He spoke to me in English also at the end. But why was this man who had no army, his charisma, I mean, he was an inspiring leader. Is that what everybody was scared of? The fact that the gas concession was never given to him, Balochistan was never a priority where the gas supplies. He has so many true complaints. What was the budget allocation for his province? So all he was speaking was for the rights of the Balochis. Was he wrong?
To be fair, I mean, I also have a very kind of mixed attitude of respect and some reservations about Nawab Akbar Bukhti. I knew him personally, and on some occasions he sent some very, very unusual messages to me. At the same time, in some respects, I think he did not do justice to the terms that he had agreed to with the Sui Gas Company and the government of Pakistan on compensation that was regularly rendered to him. That aspect of the story is not made part of public discourse. And one doesn't want to badmouth him now that he's gone, but a fairly reasonable amount used to be paid for the rights to use the territory for extracting gas. Why they did not supply gas to the immediate locality was a combination of terrible apathy and decision making, but also too literal a way of calculating the economic cost. They said, जी यहाँ पर क्या 5 कनेक्शन लगेंगे, 10 कनेक्शन लगेंगे, इससे हमारी रेवेन्यू मंथली आएगी X अमाउंट. पाइप लगाने में और ट्रांसमिशन अरेंज करने में हमें 10 करोड़ लगेंगे और वापस हमें मिलेंगे 10 लाख. which was a very blinkered view to take, because it meant that you are insulting the people from whose land you are extracting gas. So the econometrics that they used to calculate this was very absurd. I served for, as Minister for Petroleum for 4 months, but unfortunately could not implement a change in that model while I was there. But we tried to change that. They were not so much afraid, they just felt that he had aligned too closely with the Murrays at one point. And remember that he had collaborated with Zede Bhutto in the ouster of the elected government of Ataullah Mengal. Zede Bhutto brought in Nawab Bukti after dismissing the elected government of Balochistan. So, Bukti Saab's role is a very mixed role. He sided with the federal government.
And he was imprisoned for some time.
Yes, he was house arrested.
No, he was imprisoned. He did chakki.
Yes.
He told me. He did the chakki.
That was much earlier, not during Musharraf's time.
No, not during, but before.
Yeah, much earlier.
But I mean that he was a man who was speaking for his people.
Say yes, sir.
And he was put down.
I know, it was a very bad decision. There was also the episode where it had been agreed that he would visit Rawalpindi for a meeting with General Musharraf. And at the last moment, bad advice was fed to Musharraf, and that flight which was meant to bring Nawab Bukti from his home, from Dera Bukti to Rawalpindi, did not take place. Initially on the grounds that there is a fault in the helicopter in the plane, but later it was proven that it was nothing to do with that. There was a cross-wiring between advice given by some parts of GHQ and some parts of the intelligence agency system. And this happens in many countries of the world where heads of state and government get different pieces of advice. State Department gives one advice, Defense gives something else, CIA gives another, and the head of state or government has to take a final decision. In this case, I think Musharraf took the wrong decision. He should have gone ahead and met Nawab Bukti. It would have made a big difference.
With that being said, we still have one last question, so and we will surely conclude after that.
Thank you. Dr. Saab, thank you very much. Wonderful listening to you and learning a lot from you. I am Dr. Nadia Tahir, a student of economics. I wonder, you have not intentionally spoken about educational reforms, and specifically higher education reforms, and it has changed the spectrum of higher education in Pakistan and many universities. I wonder if you could speak something about it and the reforms were taken in the right direction or not. And second part, since you have written an article, what if there were no 9/11 incident? And what do you think about Musharraf, still darling of the West and specifically the USA? And what if the scenario in Pakistan, if that terrorist wave and terrorism wave has not affected the Pakistan's economy? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nadia Tahir. Again, the second question first. If there had been no 9/11, the relationship of the United States and Pakistan would have continued on a positive trajectory if Musharraf had come back to power after 2 years. What if का वो है, but ये मैं उसके 9/11 के साथ भी जोड़ रहा हूँ कि there was enough basic goodwill in him to improve relations with India. His acceptance of the 4-point formula, which we had been working on in Track 2 for several years, was an indication of his sincerity. And regardless of 9/11, I think it would have led to better relations with America and with India if he had if 9/11 had not taken place. And your first question on the higher education, absolutely. It is my oversight. I should have included a whole section where this new stress, almost taking it to another extreme by Dr. Ataur Rahman, who's an old dear friend. He went in one way completely to another extreme in promoting proliferation of universities and manufacturing PhDs and so on and so on. That has had some negative effect. But overall, it was an excellent stress to give to higher education.
Thank you so much, sir, for taking those questions, and thank you so much for our audience. For our audience members who also actively participated, that makes the book launch itself a very memorable one as well, I hope so. With that being said, our President IPRI will be making the closing remarks for this session, and he will also be presenting a memento to Senator Javed Jabbar after his remarks.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I don't have much to say, but thank you again, sir. Lots of gratitude to you for being here and sharing your views very candidly. तो मैं सोच रहा था कि आपने confluence of opinion and divergent views, दूरियां, नज़दीकियां, friendship and disenchantment, सबको बहुत अच्छे तरीके से explain किया. And I am very grateful to the audience and the people who attended this talk by great scholar for very good questions. I think excellent questions, especially जो आपका question था about Balochistan and Nawab Bhukti Sahib. I think he very aptly explained. But there are two things I would like to add. Musharraf Sahib के वक़्त में वो जो डेवलपमेंट फंड होता है पंजाब से ज़्यादा दिया गया था उनको, ये डॉक्यूमेंटेड है. Number one. Number two, we had a discussion on Balochistan. We had multiple Baloch leaders here in Marriott talking to us, and most of them, including Jam Kamal Sahib and few others, they praised actually the works which were done by him, like Dam, Mirani Dam and Kachi Canal and all that, which have irrigated multiple areas and few other good things also. May God bless his soul. But I think very aptly, sir, and very candidly, you replied all the questions, and we should be very, very grateful to you. And thank you, everyone. बहुत शुक्रिया आपका. And I will have the honor, बगैर उसके जवेरिया के I announce की, I can present with the mementos. जवेरिया.
फौजी कहते थे टी ब्रेक, तो टी ब्रेक भी है.
पिक्चर ले रहे हैं, यही पिक्चर ले रहे हैं. एक सेकंड.
I have another request to make. ग्रुप कैप्टन हादी ने कहा है कि इसके बाद अगर लोग आते हैं तो आप ये बुक साइन करते हैं. हाँ, अगर कोई गलती कर रहा है.
We also have refreshments prepared for our audience members.
Oh my God.
It has been recorded now. The bookstall is outside IPRI and the refreshments are on this side. जी जी.